Sometimes the hardest part of losing someone isn't the goodbye. It's learning how to live in a world that keeps moving forward without them. Clay Jensen knew that pain better than most. At 60 years old, the retired teacher bought a piece of forgotten land in the high desert, hoping the silence would help him heal after his wife's death. He wanted solitude, peace, and time to grieve alone. But when he came back from town that first day, he found 5 homeless women living in his barn. They were tired, stubborn, and had nowhere else to go. Clay wanted them gone. But what happened next would change all of their lives forever. Could these 6 strangers become the family none of them knew they needed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The thermos had been Linda's idea, back when Clay first started teaching at Ridgeview High School 35 years ago. A simple stainless steel container, nothing fancy, but she'd fill it every morning before dawn. Coffee made exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. Over 3 decades, that thermos had accompanied him through thousands of morning commutes, parent-teacher conferences, and faculty meetings. It sat now on the dashboard of his pickup truck, still warm, still filled with coffee he'd made himself, because there was no one else to make it anymore. The sun was just beginning to break over the eastern ridge as Clay turned off the highway onto the dirt road that led to his property. 40 acres of high desert scrubland, most of it covered in sage and rabbit brush, with a single weathered barn listing slightly to the north and a farmhouse that hadn't seen paint in 20 years. The real estate agent had called it a fixer-upper with potential. Clay called it exactly what he needed, a place where no one knew him. No one would offer sympathetic looks, and no one would ask how he was holding up. He'd bought the property 3 weeks ago with money from his early retirement package. 35 years of teaching American history to teenagers who mostly didn't care about the past had earned him a modest pension and enough savings to make a clean break. The house in Riverside, the one he and Linda had shared for 3 decades, was too full of memories. Her reading chair by the window, the kitchen where she'd hummed while making dinner, the garden she'd tended every spring until the cancer made her too weak to hold a trowel. 6 months since she'd passed. Half a year of well-meaning neighbors bringing casseroles, former colleagues suggesting grief counseling, and endless nights sitting in rooms that echoed with absence. When the real estate listing for the high desert property appeared online, Clay had made an offer within 24 hours. His daughter Michelle thought he was being impulsive. His brother said he was running away. They were both probably right. The property was located outside Copper Ridge, a town of barely 800 souls scattered across a valley where the wind never stopped blowing. The nearest grocery store was 20 miles south. The hardware store, post office, and single diner comprised the entire downtown. It was the kind of place people left, not the kind they moved to. Perfect. Clay had spent his first week on the property sleeping in the bed of his truck under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He'd wake with the sun, make coffee on a camping stove, and spend his days doing simple physical work that left him too exhausted to think. He'd replaced rotted boards on the barn's exterior, cleared brush from around the farmhouse, and begun the slow process of assessing what could be saved and what needed to be torn down and rebuilt. The barn was the better of the 2 structures. Built sometime in the 1940s, it still had good bones, solid posts and beams, a loft that hadn't yet collapsed, and enough space to house equipment or livestock if Clay ever decided to make the place actually function as a farm. The wood was weathered silver gray, and several windows were broken, but the roof held and the foundation seemed sound. It would do. The farmhouse was another story. Missing shingles, cracked windows, a porch that sagged dangerously on the north side. The interior smelled of mice and mildew, but Clay had started there too, one small repair at a time, letting the work fill the hours that used to be filled with conversation and companionship. He wore Linda's wedding ring on a chain around his neck. His own ring still circled his finger, a habit too ingrained to break. Sometimes he'd catch himself reaching for his phone to call her, to share some small observation about the land or the way the light hit the mountains at sunset. The muscle memory of love persisted even when the person was gone. On his third day, he'd driven into Copper Ridge for supplies. The hardware store was run by a man named Floyd Kemper, probably 70, with hands that spoke of a lifetime of manual labor. Floyd had taken one look at Clay loading lumber and fence posts into his cart and said, "You're the fellow who bought the Whitmore place." It wasn't a question. In a town this size, everyone knew everything. "That's right," Clay had replied. "Land's got history," Floyd had said, ringing up the purchase. "Whitmore family owned it for 60 years. Old man died 5 years back. Kids didn't want it. Been sitting empty since." "I'm not much for history anymore," Clay had said, counting out bills. "Just looking for quiet." Floyd had given him a long look, the kind that suggested he understood more than was being said. "Quiet we got plenty of. Anything else you need, you let me know." That had been the extent of Clay's social interaction in Copper Ridge. He preferred it that way. He'd pick up supplies, exchange minimal pleasantries, and return to the property where he could work until his shoulders ached and his hands were raw. The physical exhaustion helped him sleep without dreams. Linda would have loved this place, he thought sometimes. She'd always talked about leaving the suburbs, getting a piece of land, maybe keeping chickens or a garden big enough to share with neighbors. But teaching salaries didn't stretch to second properties. And there was always something else that needed the money. Michelle's college tuition, the roof replacement, the medical bills that started piling up 2 years before the end. The cancer had been merciless. Diagnosed in January, gone by August. 7 months from healthy to hospice. From the woman who volunteered at the shelter twice a week and grew tomatoes in the backyard to someone he barely recognized, hollowed out by pain and treatment. She'd made him promise not to stop living, made him swear he wouldn't become one of those men who just faded away after their wives died. He was trying to keep that promise. This move, this land, this solitary work, it was his attempt at forward motion, even if it felt more like retreat. By the end of the second week, Clay had established a routine. Wake at dawn, make coffee, work on the barn until the afternoon heat became unbearable, rest in the shade, then work on the farmhouse until the sun set. He'd heat up simple meals on the camping stove, soup, beans, sandwiches, and spend his evenings reading by lantern light or simply sitting in silence, watching the stars emerge. The loneliness was both burden and relief. No one asked him how he was feeling. No one told him that Linda was in a better place, or that time heals all wounds. Out here, grief could exist without performance, without the need to reassure others that he was okay when he absolutely was not. He'd noticed tire tracks near the barn a few times, probably kids from town using the abandoned property as a hangout spot. He'd meant to check it out more thoroughly, but kept putting it off. The barn door was closed when he left for town that morning, and he hadn't thought much of it. Now, returning with a truck bed full of lumber and supplies, Clay pulled up to the farmhouse and killed the engine. The afternoon sun sat heavy on the western horizon. He'd spent longer in town than intended. A flat tire had cost him 2 hours at the garage. He was tired, hungry, and looking forward to nothing more than heating up soup and maybe playing a little music on the old harmonica he'd found in the farmhouse kitchen drawer. Then he saw the light, just a flicker through the gaps in the barn's weathered siding, barely visible in the fading daylight, but definitely there. And voices, low, female, multiple. Clay sat in the truck for a long moment, thermos still in his hand, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Someone was in his barn. Multiple someones. He set down the thermos and climbed out of the truck slowly, his heart beginning to pound. The distance from the farmhouse to the barn was maybe 50 yards. He crossed it carefully, anger beginning to build alongside confusion. This was his property, his refuge, his place to be alone. The barn door was slightly ajar. Clay pushed it open. 5 women stood frozen in the dim interior, caught in the act of their invasion. The oldest woman stepped forward first, her hands raised in a gesture that was half surrender, half plea. She looked to be in her late 50s, grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Her face was weathered but intelligent, her eyes steady despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. "Sir, I can explain," she said, her voice calm and measured. "We're not here to cause trouble." Clay's mind was racing, trying to process the scene before him. The barn's interior had been transformed. In the corner nearest the door, sleeping bags were rolled neatly beside backpacks. A camping stove sat on an overturned crate. Clothes hung from a line strung between support posts. The space had been swept clean, organized with a precision that spoke of people trying to make the best of difficult circumstances. The other 4 women stood in various positions around the barn. One, maybe in her early 40s, held a young girl close. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, dark hair in braids, eyes wide with fear. Another woman, tall and lean with close-cropped hair, stood with military posture near the back wall, her body language defensive. A third, younger, maybe mid-30s, clutched a notebook to her chest. The last was barely more than a teenager, 19 at most, and she stared at Clay with open hostility. "Explain what?" Clay's voice came out harder than he intended. "You're trespassing. This is private property." "We know," the older woman said, "and we apologize. My name is Beatrice. We didn't know anyone had bought the property. It's been abandoned for years." "It's not abandoned anymore," Clay said. "I bought this land 3 weeks ago. This is my barn." A small, worn sneaker sat near the door, child-sized, pink with faded stars. The detail pierced through Clay's anger, complicating everything. There was a kid involved, a little girl who was now pressing her face into her mother's shirt, trying to become invisible. "We understand," Beatrice continued. "We came from the shelter in Copper Ridge. It closed 2 weeks ago. Funding dried up. They gave us 4 hours to clear out. There's a shelter in Copper Ridge?" Clay hadn't seen one during his trips to town. "Was," the woman with the military bearing said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was flat, controlled. "County closed it. Budget cuts. Nearest shelter now is 70 miles east and it's full. 3-month waiting list." Clay looked at each of them in turn. The woman holding the child. She had that worn look of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. The younger woman with the notebook had ink stains on her fingers. The teenager's hostility was a thin mask over something that looked more like terror. "So you just broke into my barn," he said. "We didn't break anything," Beatrice said. "The door was unlocked. We've been here 4 days. We cleaned. We haven't touched any of your tools or equipment. We were just—" She paused, searching for words. "We needed a roof, somewhere safe." The little girl peeked out from her mother's shirt, and Clay saw her eyes, huge and dark and afraid. She reminded him of his daughter Michelle at that age, before the world taught her to be wary. "You can't just move into someone's property," Clay said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "This isn't— I mean, you have to understand, I came here for peace and quiet," the teenager said, her voice sharp with sarcasm. "Yeah, we figured. Rich guy buys abandoned land, wants to play hermit. Meanwhile, some of us don't have the luxury of choosing where we sleep." "Quinn," Beatrice said, a warning in her tone. "What?" "It's true," Quinn shot back. "We're here because we have nowhere else. He's here because he's got enough money to buy solitude." Not exactly the same situation. Clay felt heat rising in his face. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't need to," Quinn said. "You're going to kick us out anyway. Might as well get it over with." The woman holding the child, Faye, Clay would learn later, spoke softly. "Quinn, please." She looked at Clay with exhaustion so deep it seemed to emanate from her bones. "We'll leave. Just give us until morning. It's getting dark, and my daughter—" Her voice caught. "Please, just tonight." Clay stood there, trapped between his anger at the invasion of his refuge and the undeniable reality in front of him. 5 women, 1 child, nowhere to go. The high desert got cold at night, even in late spring. He thought about what could happen to them out here. The coyotes, the rattlesnakes, the simple danger of exposure. He thought about Linda, about the years she'd spent volunteering at the women's shelter in Riverside, coming home with stories that broke his heart. Women fleeing violence, women who'd lost everything, women whom the system had failed in 1,000 small ways. Linda had believed in helping, in opening doors, in refusing to look away from suffering even when it was uncomfortable. But Linda wasn't here anymore. And Clay had come to this God-forsaken piece of desert specifically to be alone. One night, he heard himself say, "You can stay one night, but tomorrow morning you need to be gone." Beatrice's shoulders dropped with relief. "Thank you. We'll be gone first thing, I promise." "I mean it," Clay said. "First light. I'm not—" He struggled to articulate why this felt so wrong, so invasive. "This isn't a shelter. I'm not running some kind of charity." "We understand," Beatrice said. Clay turned to leave, then stopped. "That camping stove. You know how to use it safely? This barn is old dry wood everywhere." "I know," Beatrice said. "I've been careful. Was a nurse. I understand safety protocols." Clay nodded once, then walked out into the evening air. His hands were shaking. He climbed into his truck and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. His sanctuary had been invaded, his escape compromised. The solitude he'd paid for, planned for, desperately needed, gone in an instant. He looked at the barn, at the thin strips of light escaping through gaps in the wood. He could hear their voices, muffled but audible. They were talking about him probably, discussing whether he'd call the sheriff, whether they should leave tonight instead of waiting for morning. The little girl's face floated in his memory, those frightened eyes, the way she'd hidden against her mother. Clay picked up his thermos, took a long drink of now cold coffee, and stared out at the darkening desert. The mountains on the horizon were losing their definition, becoming silhouettes against a sky streaked with orange and purple. "What would you do?" He asked the empty air, asking Linda, asking the universe, asking anyone who might have an answer. "What am I supposed to do?" The desert offered no response. Just wind and sage, and the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. He spent that night in the farmhouse, in a sleeping bag on the floor, since there was no furniture yet. But he didn't sleep. He lay there listening to the silence that wasn't quite silence anymore, because now he knew there were people in his barn, strangers who'd disrupted everything, and he couldn't unknow it. By morning, he'd convinced himself they'd be gone, as promised. Beatrice seemed responsible, trustworthy. They'd leave, and things would return to normal. And this would just be a strange interlude he'd eventually forget. But when dawn broke and Clay walked out to the barn, 3 things became immediately clear. First, they were still there. Second, smoke was rising from their camping stove. They were making breakfast. And third, sitting beside the barn in the growing light, its hood propped open and its engine in pieces, was an ancient sedan that clearly wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Clay stood staring at the disassembled engine, his jaw tight. The morning air was cool, but he could already feel heat building behind his temples. He'd given them one night, and they'd agreed to leave. Now here they were, still occupying his barn, with a car that looked like it would never run again. Beatrice emerged from the barn carrying 2 tin cups. Steam rose from both. She approached him slowly, reading his body language. "Coffee?" she offered. "I made extra." Clay wanted to refuse on principle, but the smell was too good, and his own thermos was empty. He took the cup without a word. "The car died yesterday evening," Beatrice said, following his gaze to the sedan. "Floyd from the hardware store was kind enough to tow it here. He said the transmission is shot. Maybe other things too. Floyd knows you're here." Clay took a sip. The coffee was strong, good, better than his own, if he was being honest. "He saw us walking from town a few days ago. I think he guessed where we were headed." Beatrice wrapped her hands around her own cup. "Small town. People notice things. So everyone knows," Clay said flatly. "I don't think everyone, but Floyd does. He hasn't said anything to anyone, as far as I know. He seems kind, like he understands what it's like to need help." Clay took another drink, buying time to think. The sun was just clearing the eastern ridge, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. It should have been peaceful. It should have been exactly what he came here for. "How much to fix the car?" he asked. "Floyd estimates 800, maybe 1,000. Parts and labor." Beatrice's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "We have 300 between all of us. We've been saving for a deposit on an apartment, but..." She shrugged. We could put it toward the car, but that still leaves us 500 short. And how long to get the money? I don't know, Beatrice admitted. Faye's waiting to hear back about a job at the library. Delilah, the tall one with the short hair, she's applying everywhere. Nessa does art. Quinn, she paused. Quinn's young, angry, still figuring things out. And you? I'm a nurse, or I was. 30 years at County General before they restructured, cut positions. I'm 61. Nobody wants to hire a nurse my age when they can get someone younger for less money. There was no bitterness in her voice, just resignation. I'm applying too. But it takes time. Clay looked at the barn, at the car, at Beatrice standing there with dignity despite everything. He thought about sending them away, calling a tow truck, having the car removed, making them someone else's problem. But where would they go? What would happen to the little girl? 3 days, he said. You said last night you needed 3 days to figure things out. I'm holding you to that. 3 days, then you need to have a plan. Relief flickered across Beatrice's face. Thank you. We'll stay out of your way. You won't even know we're here. I'll know, Clay said. But he handed back the empty cup and walked toward the farmhouse without another word. The morning proceeded in awkward parallel. Clay worked on replacing boards on the farmhouse porch, hyper-aware of activity at the barn. He could hear voices, the women talking among themselves, the child's occasional laughter. At one point he saw Quinn working on the car's engine, grease up to her elbows, cursing colourfully enough that Beatrice had to tell her to mind her language around Iris. Around midday, Clay noticed Faye walking the fence line on the property's eastern border. She moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to examine posts or wire. She had a notebook and was writing things down. Despite himself, Clay was curious. He walked over. "What are you doing?" he asked, not rudely but directly. Faye looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just looking at the fence. It needs work. I know it needs work. That's why I bought fencing supplies in town yesterday." "Right, of course." She closed the notebook. "I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming. I notice these things." She gestured at the nearest post. "This one's rotted at the base. It'll fall over in the next strong wind. And the wires rusted through in at least 4 places I've seen so far." Clay examined the post. She was right. He'd noticed it himself, but hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet. "You know how to mend fence?" he asked. "Been doing it since I was 12, Faye said. "My father raised cattle. 500 acres. I was the oldest, so I learned everything. Mending fence, mucking stalls, helping with calving. I can handle myself around tools." There was something in the way she said it, a quiet pride, a need to be seen as competent, not helpless. Clay recognized it because he felt it himself, that need to be useful, to have value beyond your circumstances. "The supplies are in the truck," he found himself saying. "Post-hole diggers in the barn. If you want to help, I won't stop you." Faye's face brightened. "Really? I said 3 days. Might as well make use of the time." He started walking toward the truck. "But I don't have proper gloves in your size. You'll tear up your hands." "I've got work gloves in my pack," Faye said, already heading toward the barn. "Give me 2 minutes." They worked together for the next 2 hours, barely speaking but moving in sync. Faye knew what she was doing, how to set a post plumb, how to tension wire properly, how to work efficiently without wasted motion. Clay found himself relaxing into the rhythm of the work, letting the physical labor quiet his mind. "Can I ask you something?" Faye said as they tamped dirt around a new post. Clay grunted acknowledgement. "Why'd you buy this place?" He didn't answer right away, testing the post for stability. Needed somewhere quiet. Running from something or toward something. The question was too perceptive. Clay straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Does it matter?" "I guess not." Faye moved to the next section of fence. "I was running. From my ex-husband. He was—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "He wasn't a good man. I took Iris and left with what we could carry. The shelter in Copper Ridge was the first place I felt safe in 2 years. Clay looked at her, really looked at her. She was probably in her early 40s, with the kind of weathered beauty that came from hard work and harder times. There were faint scars on her forearms, old ones. "I'm sorry," he said, inadequate but genuine. "Don't be. We got out. That's what matters. She tested the wire tension. Iris is safe. That's all I care about. They continued working, and Clay found himself thinking about Linda again. She'd always been the one who knew what to say, how to connect with people in pain. He'd been the pragmatic one, the problem solver, the one who fixed things that were broken. But you couldn't fix people the way you fix fences. By mid-afternoon, they'd replaced 3 posts and restrung 50 feet of wire. Clay's shoulders ached in a good way. Faye was moving more slowly too, clearly tired but satisfied with the work. "Thank you," she said as they put away the tools, "for letting me help. It feels good to be useful." "You're good at it," Clay acknowledged. "Better than most." "Ranch girl," Faye said with a slight smile. "It's in my blood." As she walked back to the barn, Clay stood there with wire cutters in hand, watching her go. He was starting to see them as individuals now, not just an abstract problem to be solved. Beatrice with her quiet competence, Faye with her ranch skills and fierce love for her daughter. It complicated things knowing them, made it harder to think of them as simply trespassers. That evening, as the sun began its descent, Beatrice appeared at the farmhouse door. Clay was inside, eating beans straight from a can and reading a water-stained paperback he'd found in a closet. "We made stew," Beatrice called through the screen. "Too much for just us. Would you like some?" "It's nothing fancy, just what we had," but Clay's first instinct was to refuse. Accepting food felt like accepting the situation, like agreeing to something he hadn't agreed to. But he was tired of beans, and the smell drifting from the barn was making his mouth water. "I'll be there in a minute," he said. When he entered the barn, the women had arranged crates and boards into makeshift seating around the camping stove. The little girl, Iris, was setting out mismatched bowls with serious concentration. She looked up when Clay entered, her eyes wary but curious. "This is Mr. Clay," Faye said to her daughter. "Can you say hello?" "Hello," Iris whispered, then hid behind her mother's leg. Clay nodded at the child, not sure what else to do. He took the bowl Beatrice offered and sat on an overturned bucket slightly apart from the group. The stew was good. Vegetables and beans and some kind of seasoning that made it taste better than it had any right to. They ate mostly in silence at first, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the whisper of wind through the barn's gaps. The second day began, with the smell of coffee drifting across the property before Clay had even opened his eyes. He lay in his sleeping bag for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar ritual of waking to someone else's presence. For 3 weeks he'd been utterly alone. Now there were people, women, a child, moving through the morning on his land. When he emerged from the farmhouse, he found the women already busy. Delilah was doing what looked like calisthenics near the barn. Precise movements, military in their execution. Nessa sat on an overturned bucket with a sketchbook balanced on her knees. Quinn was back under the car's hood, muttering to herself. Faye and Iris were hanging laundry on a line, strung between 2 posts. Beatrice saw him and raised a hand in greeting. The new thermos, one he'd seen in her belongings, sat on a wooden crate beside the barn door. "Help yourself," she called. "There's plenty." Clay wanted to assert his independence, to make his own coffee in his own space. But pragmatism won. He walked over and poured himself a cup from the thermos. "Thank you," he said stiffly. "You're welcome." Beatrice was sweeping dust from the barn's interior. "We're trying to keep everything clean. Don't want to be bad guests." "You're not guests," Clay said. "Guests are invited." Beatrice paused in her sweeping. "Fair point. But we're trying to be respectful. That counts for something." Clay couldn't argue with that. He took his coffee and headed toward town, needing supplies, and if he was honest with himself, needing distance from the complicated situation at his barn. Floyd was behind the counter at the hardware store when Clay entered. The old man's eyes lit with recognition. "Morning, Clay. How are things out at your place?" "Fine," Clay said shortly, gathering items from the shelves, nails, sandpaper, wood glue. "Heard you've got company." Floyd's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Clay set his items on the counter with more force than necessary. "Word travels fast." "Small town." Floyd began ringing up the purchases. That old barn's seen its share of folks needing shelter over the years. The Whitmores never minded much. Figured if the building was standing empty, might as well let it serve some purpose. Well, I'm not the Whitmores. Floyd accepted Clay's cash, counted out change with deliberate slowness. Linda volunteered at the shelter over in Riverside, didn't she? I remember her coming through town a few times, buying supplies to bring back. Good woman, kind heart. The mention of Linda's name stopped Clay cold. How did you... Recognized you from your wedding ring and the way you carry yourself. Plus, you've got that look. Floyd met his eyes. The look of a man who lost something he can't get back. Seen it before. Clay stood there, change in his hand, feeling exposed in a way he hadn't expected. She died 6 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss. Floyd's voice was gentle. Grief is a heavy thing to carry alone. I came here to be alone. Sometimes what we think we need and what we actually need are two different things. Floyd slid Clay's purchases across the counter. Those women in your barn, they're not asking for charity. They're just asking for a chance. There's a difference. Clay gathered his items and left without responding, but Floyd's words followed him back to the property like unwelcome passengers. When he returned, he found Faye examining another section of fence. She waved when she saw him, and despite himself, Clay found his truck heading in her direction. Found another weak section, she said as he approached. This whole eastern line needs attention. I know. I've been working my way through the property. You're doing a good job, Faye said. The work on the barn looks solid. You have carpentry experience? High school shop teacher for 5 years before I switched to history. Kept up with it, though. Built a deck on our house. Renovated the kitchen. He caught himself using past tense, our house, as if it didn't exist anymore. In a way, it didn't, not for him. They worked together again, falling into yesterday's rhythm. After a while, Faye said, Iris asked about you this morning. What about me? Whether you were nice, whether she should be scared of you. Faye positioned a new post. I told her you seemed like a good man who needed space. That we were grateful you were letting us stay, even temporarily. What did she say? She said you looked sad. She's perceptive that way. Sees things other people miss. Faye paused. She's been through a lot. Her father, my ex, he was unpredictable, angry. Iris learned to read moods early for survival. Clay tamped dirt around the post base, thinking about the little girl with the dark braids and cautious eyes. How old is she? 7, second grade, or she should be. We've been moving around so much, her schooling's been inconsistent. I try to work with her when I can, but I'm not a teacher. What subjects does she struggle with? Reading, mostly. She's smart, but she gets frustrated easily. Starts to shut down when things get hard. Clay knew that pattern. Had seen it in countless students over the years. The ones who'd learned that failing was safer than trying. I could work with her, he heard himself say, if you want. Just basic reading skills, phonics work. Nothing formal. Faye stopped working, staring at him. You do that? I'm a teacher. Was a teacher. It's what I know. He felt self-conscious suddenly. Only if you're comfortable with it. Are you kidding? That would be... Clay, that would mean everything. Faye's eyes were suddenly bright with emotion. She needs stability, structure. Someone patient who knows what they're doing. It would just be an hour or so in the afternoons. When the work gets too hot. Thank you, Faye said softly. Really, thank you. That afternoon, Clay found himself sitting in the shade of the barn with Iris and a children's book he'd driven back to town to buy. The little girl sat a careful distance away, clearly uncertain but willing to try. Do you like stories? Clay asked. Iris nodded. What kind? A shrug. Clay opened the book. This one's about a girl who finds a secret garden. How about we read it together? I'll read a sentence, then you read a sentence. They worked through the first page slowly. Iris stumbled over words, her frustration visible. But Clay was patient, breaking down the sounds, helping without doing it for her. By the end of the page, she was smiling slightly. You did well, Clay said. That was good work. Really? Really. You got better just in that one page. That's how learning works, small steps that add up over time. Iris looked at the book with something like pride. Can we do another page? Tomorrow, Clay said. Good learning happens in small doses. Gives your brain time to rest. As Iris ran off to show her mother the book, Clay realized he'd enjoyed the last hour more than any he'd spent since arriving at the property. Teaching had always grounded him, given him purpose. He'd forgotten how much he missed it. That evening, Beatrice approached him as he worked on the farmhouse porch. She held something in her hand, a small photograph, edges worn from handling. "Can I show you something?" she asked. Clay set down his hammer. Beatrice handed him the photograph. It showed a young man in his 20s, dark hair, easy smile, military uniform. "My son, Philip, he's 32 now, lives in Oregon, works in construction." Her voice was controlled, but Clay heard the pain beneath it. "We haven't spoken in 5 years. We had a falling out. Stupid, really. I wanted him to go to college. He wanted to work with his hands. I pushed too hard. Said things I shouldn't have said. Why are you telling me this? Because I've had a lot of time to think about pride. About what it costs." She took the photo back, studied it. "I was a nurse for 30 years. Good at my job. When I lost it, I was angry, humiliated. Philip offered to help financially. I refused. Told him I didn't need charity, especially from someone who disappointed me." She tucked the photo into her shirt pocket. "Now I'm homeless, living in a stranger's barn, and I still haven't called him. Because admitting I need help feels like admitting I was wrong about everything." She looked at Clay directly. "Pride is a luxury people like us can't afford anymore. But we cling to it anyway." Clay understood what she was really saying, that they were more alike than different, he and these women. All of them clinging to something. All of them trying to maintain dignity in the face of loss. "Have you tried calling him?" Clay asked. "No," Beatrice admitted. "I'm too scared. What if he doesn't answer? What if he's moved on, built a life that doesn't include me? What if he's waiting for you to reach out?" Beatrice smiled sadly. "That's the hope that keeps me up at night." She walked back to the barn, leaving Clay alone with his thoughts. He touched Linda's ring through his shirt, his own talisman of loss, his own symbol of pride and stubbornness. Inside the farmhouse, he pulled out his phone. He'd been avoiding checking messages, avoiding the outside world. Now he scrolled through texts from his daughter Michelle, increasingly worried messages asking if he was okay, if he needed anything, when she could visit. He typed a response, "I'm fine. Property is coming along. Maybe you could visit next month." It wasn't much, but it was something. As darkness settled over the desert, Clay sat on the porch and pulled out the old harmonica he'd found in the kitchen. He hadn't played in years, decades really, but his fingers remembered the positions, and after a few false starts, a simple melody emerged. From the barn, he heard the women's voices quiet to listen. He played through the song, something his father had taught him in childhood, a folk tune about wandering and finding home. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Quinn's voice, grudging but sincere, "That was actually pretty good." Clay allowed himself a small smile in the darkness. The 3 days came and went without discussion. On the 4th morning, Clay woke to the same smells and sounds, coffee brewing, quiet voices, the little girl's laughter. He realized he'd stopped counting days until they left and started counting days they'd been there. It was a subtle shift, but it meant something. He found Beatrice tending to a cut on his hand that he'd gotten the previous afternoon while repairing a window frame. He hadn't mentioned it to anyone, had just wrapped it in an old rag. But Beatrice had noticed. "Let me see that," she said, her nurse's voice allowing no argument. Clay held out his hand. The cut wasn't deep, but it was dirty, inflamed around the edges. "When did this happen?" Beatrice asked, already pulling antiseptic and bandages from a small first aid kit. "Yesterday. It's fine. It's infected, or getting there." She cleaned the wound with efficient, gentle movements. "You need to take better care of yourself. Working with your hands all day, you can't afford to let something like this fester." Clay watched her work, noting the steadiness of her hands, the practiced competence. "You're good at this." 30 years of practice. She wrapped the cut with clean gauze. "I miss it sometimes, the work, having purpose beyond just surviving." "Why did they let you go?" "Budget cuts seems like a poor excuse to lose an experienced nurse." Beatrice's hands paused for just a moment. "The official reason was restructuring. The real reason? I'm 61. They could hire 2 new grads for what they paid me. Healthcare is a business now, not a calling. She finished tying off the bandage. There, keep it clean and dry. Change the dressing tomorrow. Thank you. You're welcome. She packed away the supplies. You know, you never talk about your wife, Linda. Floyd mentioned her. Clay stiffened. There's not much to talk about. There's probably everything to talk about. But you keep it locked inside. Beatrice's eyes were kind but direct. I lost my husband 15 years ago. Heart attack. He was 53, coaching our son's baseball game. Just collapsed. Gone before the ambulance arrived. I'm sorry. The point is, I understand that kind of loss. The kind that comes without warning. That leaves you standing in a world that suddenly makes no sense. She sat down on a nearby crate. For a long time I was angry. Angry at him for leaving. Angry at myself for every argument we'd had. Every moment I'd wasted being petty or tired or distracted. Clay found himself sitting down too, on the edge of the porch. How do you get past it? You don't get past it. You learn to carry it differently. Beatrice looked out at the desert, at the morning light painting everything gold. Eventually, the weight becomes part of your strength instead of just your burden. The grief changes shape. It never leaves, but it becomes something you can live with instead of something that's killing you. They sat in silence for a while, and Clay found himself talking about Linda's diagnosis, the speed of her decline, the hospice bed in their living room, the way she'd made him promise not to disappear into grief. She told me I had too much love left to give, Clay said quietly, that I needed to stay open to life even though it hurt, especially because it hurt. She sounds like she was wise. She was better than me, kinder, more patient. I was always the practical one, the problem solver. She was the heart of everything we did. He touched the ring through his shirt. I don't know how to be both things. Maybe you don't have to be, Beatrice said. Maybe you just have to be yourself and let other people fill in the gaps. That's what community is. People covering each other's weaknesses, supporting each other's strengths. Before Clay could respond, Gwyn appeared from behind the barn, covered in grease and looking triumphant. I figured it out, she announced. The transmission's shot, but that's not the only problem. The timing belt's gone too, and there's some electrical issue I haven't tracked down yet. But I can fix it. I just need parts and time. How much time? Clay asked. Quinn shrugged. Week, maybe 2. If I can get the parts, and if nobody bothers me while I'm working. Where'd you learn mechanics? Clay asked. Foster Dad. One of them anyway. He ran an auto shop. Taught me everything he knew before I aged out of the system. For once, Quinn's voice wasn't defensive or hostile. She was talking about something she loved, and it showed. Cars make sense. They follow rules. You treat them right, they run. Treat them wrong, they break. Simple. Not like people, Clay said. Exactly. Quinn looked at the car with something like affection. This one's been treated wrong for a while, but I can bring it back. You're good at it, Clay observed. You could make a career out of that skill. Quinn's defenses went back up. Yeah, well, need money for technical school. Need an address to get financial aid. Need a lot of things I don't have. You have time, Clay said. You're what, 19? 19 and homeless. Real promising start. You're 19 and skilled and smart, Clay corrected. That's more than a lot of people have. Quinn looked at him suspiciously, as if waiting for the catch, the lecture. When it didn't come, she nodded once and returned to the car. That afternoon, while working with Iris on reading, Clay noticed Nessa sitting in the shade with her sketchbook. When the lesson ended and Iris ran off to play, he wandered over. Can I see what you're working on? He asked. Nessa looked up, startled. She was shy, he'd noticed, spoke rarely, moved quietly through the space as if trying not to be noticed. But when she opened the sketchbook, Clay saw real talent. Page after page of drawings, the desert landscape, the barn from different angles, detailed studies of wildflowers. And portraits. Beatrice's weathered face, wisdom in every line. Faye's profile, fierce and protective. Gwyn mid-laugh, her guard dropped. Iris reading, concentration absolute. These are remarkable, Clay said honestly. You have real skill. Nessa's cheeks colored. Thank you. I used to want to be a professional artist. Went to community college for a year, studied design, but then, she shrugged, life happened. Money ran out. I had to work instead of study. What kind of work? Whatever I could get. Retail, mostly fast food. Nothing that mattered. It all matters, Clay said. Honest work is honest work. But this, he gestured at the sketchbook. This is a gift. Have you thought about trying to sell your work? Who would buy drawings from a homeless woman? Nessa's voice was flat, resigned. Someone who appreciates art and doesn't care about the artist's address. Clay studied the sketches again. There's a gallery in Copper Ridge. Small place, but they display local artists. You should talk to them. I don't know. What have you got to lose? Nessa considered this. I guess nothing. But I'd need frames or at least better paper. These are just sketches. Start with what you have. See if there's interest. Clay handed back the sketchbook. Sometimes we talk ourselves out of opportunities before we even try. Later that evening, Delilah approached Clay as he worked on reinforcing a section of the barn wall. She moved with that distinctive military bearing, back straight, steps measured, alert to everything around her. Need a hand? She asked. Sure. Hold this beam steady while I secure it. They worked in compatible silence for several minutes. Clay had noticed Delilah did regular perimeter checks of the property, old habits from military service, probably. She was vigilant in ways that suggested real trauma, real reasons for caution. Army or Marines? Clay asked. Army combat medic. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Delilah adjusted her grip on the beam. Got out 4 years ago. Why'd you leave? Didn't have a choice. Medical discharge. PTSD. She said it matter-of-factly, without shame. Started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't function. Army decided I was more liability than asset. I'm sorry. Don't be. They were right. I was a mess. Delilah waited while Clay drove in another nail. Spent 2 years in and out of VA programs. Got better mostly. But employers see PTSD on your record, and suddenly you're unemployable. Too risky. Too unstable. That's not fair. Fair doesn't enter into it. She tested the beam's stability. But I'm managing. The structure here, routine, purpose, people depending on each other, it helps. I sleep better than I have in years. Clay understood what she wasn't saying, that losing this place, this routine, would be devastating. That stability was medicine for her in ways that formal treatment hadn't been. That night, Floyd arrived unexpectedly with his truck bed full of supplies, blankets, canned goods, basic toiletries. Community donations, he explained as they unloaded. Word got out about your situation. People wanted to help. I didn't ask for help, Clay said, uncomfortable with the attention. No, but they're offering anyway. That's what neighbors do. Floyd set down a box of non-perishables. Besides, folks remember Linda's work. This is their way of honoring that. The women were grateful but wary. Quinn especially seemed uncomfortable with charity, seeing it as pity. We're not objects to be pitied, she muttered. Nobody's pitying you, Beatrice said gently. They're helping. There's a difference. That night, as the group gathered for dinner, Clay found himself included naturally in the circle. No longer an outsider observing, but part of the whole. They talked about the day's work, about plans for tomorrow, about small victories and minor setbacks. Iris fell asleep against Clay's shoulder partway through the meal, and he let her stay there, this small, warm weight that represented trust he wasn't sure he'd earned. When Faye came to collect her daughter, she smiled at Clay, grateful, warm, genuine. Thank you, she said. For everything. Clay realized he'd stopped thinking about when they would leave. Now he was thinking about how to make them stay. 2 weeks had passed since the women arrived, and the property had begun to transform. The fence line was nearly complete. The barn's interior was organized and livable. The farmhouse was starting to look like an actual home rather than a construction project. But more than the physical changes, something subtler had shifted. The quality of silence, the rhythm of days, the sense of purpose that came from shared work. Clay was searching for a wrench in the old farmhouse when he found the box. It was tucked in the back of a closet covered in dust, clearly untouched for years. Inside were remnants of the previous owners' lives, old photographs, receipts, a child's drawing. And beneath those, an envelope with his name on it. Not his name exactly, just to whoever finds this place next. But the handwriting was Linda's. Clay's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was dated 3 weeks before she died, written during one of her last good days, when the pain medication still let her think clearly. "My dearest Clay," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've done something brave, left the familiar behind, sought out something new. I'm proud of you for that. I know how hard change is for you, how much you prefer the known and the safe. But love, you can't hide forever. Grief will find you no matter where you go. So when it does, when you're sitting alone in some strange place wondering if you made a mistake, remember this: you have so much love left to give. Don't let my death make you a stranger to yourself. You've spent 35 years being half of a whole. Now you have to learn to be complete on your own. But that doesn't mean being alone. The people who need you might not look like what you expect. Let them in anyway. Trust that there's still joy waiting for you, still purpose, still love in different forms. Don't waste the years you have left protecting yourself from life. I love you. I'll always love you. But I need you to live, really live, not just exist. Promise me." Clay sat on the floor of the empty house, the letter clutched in both hands, and cried for the first time since the funeral. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and ancient, a grief he'd been holding at bay with work and isolation and sheer stubborn will. Linda had known him so well, had known exactly what he'd do, where he'd go, how he'd try to disappear into solitude and work. And somehow, impossibly, she'd predicted this moment, these women, this choice. When the tears finally stopped, Clay felt hollowed out but also lighter. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, next to his heart, next to her ring. Beatrice found him 20 minutes later, sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. "You all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Clay pulled out the letter and handed it to her, without a word. Beatrice read it slowly, carefully, then handed it back. "She knew you well. Better than I knew myself, apparently. The people who love us often do." Beatrice sat down beside him. "My husband used to tell me I was too proud for my own good. I'd get angry, tell him he didn't understand. But he was right. And now here I am, homeless, because I was too proud to ask my son for help when I lost my job." Clay looked at her. "Have you thought more about calling him?" "Every day. But I'm terrified." "Of what?" "That he won't answer. Or worse, that he will, but he won't care. That I've damaged that relationship beyond repair." She twisted her hands together. "What if I waited too long?" "What if you didn't?" Clay countered. "What if he's been waiting for you to reach out, thinking you don't want him in your life?" Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. I need to find the courage. Linda always said courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway." Clay stood, offering Beatrice his hand. "Come on, let's go make that call." They walked to the barn together. Beatrice's phone was old, battered, but it still worked. She held it like it might explode, staring at her son's contact information. "What do I even say?" she asked. "Start with hello," Clay suggested. "The rest will follow." The other women had gathered, sensing something important was happening. Even Quinn had emerged from under the car, grease-streaked but attentive. Beatrice took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Clay could see her preparing for voicemail, for rejection. Then a man's voice. "Mom." Beatrice's face crumpled. "Philip, hi, Her voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. For being stubborn and proud and—" "Mom, stop. Where are you? Are you okay?" The voice on the other end was urgent, concerned. It's complicated, but I'm safe. I'm with good people." She looked around at the women, at Clay. "I just needed to hear your voice. To tell you I was wrong. About everything. You were right to follow your own path. I should have supported you instead of—" "Mom, none of that matters now. Tell me where you are. Let me help." They talked for 20 minutes. Beatrice alternating between tears and laughter, filling in the gaps of 5 lost years. When she finally hung up, her face was transformed. "He's coming to visit," she said, wonder in her voice. "Next month. He wants to meet everyone, see where I'm living." He's not angry. He said he's missed me every single day. The women surrounded her, offering hugs and congratulations. Even Quinn managed to smile. That evening, Clay cooked dinner for everyone. A simple meal of pasta and sauce, but made with care. They ate together in the barn, now lit with strings of lights that Delilah had rigged up using a solar generator Floyd had donated. Nessa had been working on something all week, and after dinner she revealed it, a mural on the barn's interior wall. She'd painted the desert at sunrise, with 6 figures silhouetted against the sky, standing together. The detail was exquisite. You could see the individual sage plants, the texture of the mountains, the gradations of color in the sky. "It's us," Iris said, pointing at the figures. "Look, that's you, Mama, and that's Mr. Clay, and that's me." Nessa had captured something essential about each of them. Beatrice's steady presence, Faye's protective stance, Delilah's alert posture, Quinn's defensive strength, Iris's childish joy, Clay's solid reliability. At the bottom, she'd painted words in flowing script. "Family isn't what you're born to. It's what you build." Clay stood before the mural, overwhelmed. This was art, yes, but it was also prophecy. A vision of what they'd become, without quite realizing it was happening. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." "Thank you," Nessa replied. "All of you. This is the first time in years I've felt like I could create something that mattered." Quinn approached Clay later, when the others were cleaning up. She held out her grease-stained hands awkwardly. "So I've been thinking," she started, uncharacteristically hesitant. "About what you said. About technical school. Yeah? Floyd mentioned there's a community college about 40 miles from here. They have an automotive program. I looked it up. It's actually good. Like really good." She shuffled her feet. "Financial aid application deadline is in 2 weeks. You should apply," Clay said. "I don't have an address." Clay didn't hesitate. "Use this one. This property. You live here." Quinn's eyes widened. "But we're leaving soon, right? Once Faye gets a job, once we get money together." "Are you leaving?" Clay asked. "Has anyone actually talked about leaving recently?" Quinn looked around at the barn, at the mural, at the space they'd all created together. "I guess not. Then apply. List this address. Make plans like you're staying. We'll figure out the rest as we go." For the first time since Clay had met her, Quinn's defenses dropped completely. "Why are you doing this?" "For all of us? We're nothing to you. You're not nothing," Clay said firmly. He struggled to find the right words. "You're the family I didn't know I needed." Linda knew. She knew before I did. That I needed to be needed. That I needed purpose beyond just existing. Quinn nodded slowly, then surprised him by stepping forward and hugging him briefly, awkwardly. "Thanks, old man," Clay smiled. "You're welcome, kid." That night, as the desert cooled and stars emerged in brilliant profusion, Clay sat on the porch with the harmonica. He played the folk tune again, but this time he added variations, improvisations, letting the music reflect the complexity of what he was feeling. From the barn came the sound of voices, women talking, laughing, planning. Iris's giggle, Quinn's sarcastic commentary, Beatrice's gentle corrections, Faye's warm responses, Delilah's rare laugh, Nessa's quiet observations, the sounds of family. They played until his lips were tired and his heart was full. Linda's letter was in his pocket, her ring around his neck, her spirit somehow present in everything that had happened. She'd guided him here to this moment, to these people. She'd known what he needed before he did. The wind carried the music across the desert, and Clay thought he could almost hear her voice in it, approving, loving, telling him he'd done well. He'd come here to hide from life. Instead, he'd found a reason to live again. The morning began like any other. Coffee brewed, birds sang. The desert sun rose over the eastern ridge, painting everything gold. Clay was working on the farmhouse roof when he saw the county vehicle coming up the dirt road, dust trailing behind it like a warning. His stomach dropped. Something about an official vehicle arriving unannounced felt ominous. The women saw it too. Delilah's military instincts kicked in immediately. She positioned herself where she could see both the vehicle and the barn, her body tense and ready. Gwyn disappeared under the car, as if making herself invisible would make whatever was coming go away. Faye pulled Iris close. A woman in her 50s emerged from the vehicle, carrying a clipboard and wearing the weary expression of someone who delivered bad news for a living. She was dressed in county office attire, sensible shoes, practical skirt, ID badge clipped to her blazer. "Are you Clayton Jensen?" she called up to the roof. Clay climbed down slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Zoning violation? Complaint from neighbors about the women? Something worse? "I'm Clay Jensen. I'm Patricia Vance, county clerk's office." She didn't offer her hand, just consulted her clipboard. "I'm here about the property taxes on this parcel." "Property taxes? I just bought this place a month ago." "Yes, I'm aware. That's the problem." She pulled a document from her clipboard and handed it to him. The previous owner, the Whitmore estate, had 3 years of unpaid back taxes on this property. When you purchased it, those taxes became your responsibility. Clay scanned the document, his eyes catching on numbers that made his blood run cold. $47,000. Due within 30 days, or the property would go to county auction. Wait, this can't be right. The real estate agent never mentioned. The agent should have disclosed it. That's a legal requirement. But whether they did or not, the debt exists. Patricia's voice was sympathetic but firm. The county sent multiple notices to the Whitmore estate address. When they went unanswered, the matter escalated. The property was scheduled for auction when your purchase went through. That stayed the auction, but the debt remains. The women had gathered now, drawn by the official presence, by the tension in Clay's posture. "How much time do I have?" Clay asked, though he already knew the answer. 30 days from today. If payment isn't received in full, the property goes to auction. You'd have to vacate, and if I can't pay..." Patricia looked at him, then at the women, at the clearly inhabited barn, at Iris clutching her mother's hand. "Then whoever buys it at auction becomes the new owner. They can evict current occupants immediately." She handed Clay additional paperwork. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. If you have questions, call the county assessor's office. The number's on the form." She got back in her vehicle and drove away, leaving them standing in a cloud of settling dust. Beatrice was the first to speak. "How bad is it?" Clay looked at the notice, at the number that represented everything he'd tried to build here, everything they'd all built together. 47,000. "I don't have it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Your retirement savings?" Faye asked quietly. "Enough to live on modestly." "Not enough for this." Not even close. Clay felt the familiar weight of failure settling on his shoulders. "I should have checked. Should have done due diligence. I was so focused on just escaping, I didn't ask the right questions." "It's not your fault," Beatrice said. "The agent should have disclosed it. But they didn't, and now we're..." Clay gestured helplessly at the barn, at the women, at everything they'd built. "You'll have to leave. Find somewhere else." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Iris started crying, understanding enough to know something terrible was happening. Faye picked her up, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. Gwyn kicked at the dirt, her face twisted with anger and something that looked like betrayal. "Of course, just when things were getting better. Of course this happens. There has to be something we can do," Delilah said, her tactical mind already working the problem. "We could fight it in court, challenge the process. Legal fees would cost more than I have," Clay said. "And even if we won, which is unlikely, it would take months." "We don't have months." Nessa stood before her mural, touching the painted figures with trembling fingers. All that work, all that hope about to be erased. The group stood in stunned silence, each processing the magnitude of what they were losing. It wasn't just shelter. It was the first place any of them had felt safe in years. It was family, purpose, home. And now it was being ripped away by bureaucracy and unpaid bills, and Clay's failure to ask the right questions. That evening, the mood in the barn was funeral. No one knew what to say. Plans were meaningless when the foundation was crumbling beneath them. But Beatrice, always practical, refused to give up. "We need to think. There has to be an option we're not seeing." "Like what?" Quinn's voice was bitter. "Rob a bank? Win the lottery? We could try crowdfunding," Nessa suggested quietly. People do it all the time. Share our story online, ask for help. Who's going to donate $47,000 to strangers? Quinn shot back. People who believe in second chances, Beatrice said firmly. People who understand what it's like to struggle. It's worth trying. I'll do it, Faye said suddenly. I'll write it. Tell our story. What have we got to lose? Clay wanted to object, to say they shouldn't have to beg strangers for money to fix his mistake. But the truth was, he had no better ideas. And the women deserved a chance, any chance, to keep what they'd built. They spent the night drafting the crowdfunding campaign. Faye wrote with raw honesty about their circumstances. Clay's loss, the women's homelessness, the unexpected family they'd become. Nessa provided photos of the mural, of the transformed barn, of the 6 of them working together. Quinn set up the technical side, creating the page and linking it to social media. By midnight it was live. 6 strangers building a home. Help us keep it. The first donations came within hours. Small amounts, $10, $25, from people Clay didn't know. Strangers moved by the story, by the photos, by the simple truth that sometimes good people just need a hand. By morning, they'd raised $300. It felt simultaneously miraculous and utterly insufficient. 300 toward 47,000. The math was impossible. Floyd arrived mid-morning with the local newspaper. Their story had been picked up, a small feature in the community section. The headline read, "Teacher and homeless women fight to keep desert homestead." Didn't know if you'd want the attention, Floyd said, but might help with your fundraising. The article was fair, focusing on the human elements, loss, resilience, community, hope. It included the crowdfunding link. Donations increased. By noon, they'd reached $1,000. By evening, 3,000. It was incredible. It was also nowhere near enough. The women watched the numbers climb with a mixture of hope and despair. Every donation was a validation, proof that their story mattered, that people cared. But the goal remained impossibly distant. We need 35,000 more in 28 days, Delilah calculated. That's over $1,000 a day. We're not going to make it. We might, Beatrice insisted. If the story gets picked up by bigger outlets, if it goes viral, and if it doesn't, Quinn asked. No one had an answer. That week became a blur of effort. Faye reached out to every news outlet she could find. Nessa created more art to share online, emotional pieces about home and family and belonging. Delilah organized the campaign logistics with military precision. Quinn maintained the technical infrastructure. Beatrice fielded questions and thank you messages. Clay worked the property harder than ever, as if physical labor could somehow change their circumstances. But at night, he lay awake calculating and recalculating, always arriving at the same conclusion. They were going to lose everything. A week passed, then 2. The campaign had raised $12,000, an amount that would have seemed impossible a month ago, but still hopelessly short of what they needed. Clay contacted the county requesting an extension. Denied. He explored loan options. No bank would lend to a retired teacher with modest income and no collateral beyond property already in jeopardy. He considered selling everything he owned, his truck, his tools, Linda's jewelry. But even liquidating everything wouldn't bridge the gap. With 14 days remaining, they'd raised $16,000. The donations had slowed to a trickle. The initial viral attention had faded. Reality was setting in. Beatrice found Clay sitting alone behind the farmhouse, staring at nothing. "We're going to lose it," he said flatly. "I'm going to lose you all." "You're not losing us," Beatrice said, sitting beside him. "We're family now. That doesn't end just because we're not in the same place." "Yes, it does. You'll scatter. You'll have to. There's no shelter that can take all of you together. Social services will split you up. Faye and Iris will go one place, you somewhere else, Quinn to another city. The family we built will be destroyed by logistics and necessity." Beatrice didn't argue because she knew he was right. "I'm sorry," Clay said, his voice breaking. "I brought you hope and I'm taking it away. That's worse than if I'd never offered it at all." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "Hope is never worse. These weeks they've saved us, Clay, all of us. including you. Whatever happens next, we had this. We had family and purpose and home. That matters. That will always matter. But Clay couldn't find comfort in the words. He'd failed them. Failed Linda, who'd trusted him to stay open to life. Failed these women who'd trusted him with their futures. Failed himself. The desert wind carried dust across the property, and Clay watched it settle on everything they'd built, already beginning the slow process of reclaiming what would soon be abandoned. The letters started arriving on the 8th day of the final 2 weeks. Not emails or online messages, but actual physical letters. Envelopes with stamps, return addresses from across the country, handwritten notes from strangers who'd seen their story. Clay found the first batch in his mailbox when he drove to town for supplies. 15 envelopes, all addressed to him at the property. He sat in the hardware store parking lot and opened them one by one. A woman in Vermont wrote about being homeless 15 years ago, how a stranger's kindness had changed her trajectory. She enclosed a check for $50. I wish it could be more. A veteran in Oregon who'd seen Delilah's story sent $100 and a note. For a sister in arms. Some battles we fight alone, some we fight together. An elderly couple from Iowa who'd lost their farm in the recession decades ago sent $25. We remember what it's like. Keep fighting. Clay sat in his truck reading letter after letter, and something shifted inside him. They weren't going to reach their goal. The math still didn't work. But these letters proved something important. Their story mattered. Their struggle was seen. They weren't alone. He brought the letters back to the barn and read them aloud that evening. The women listened, some crying, all moved by the knowledge that people they'd never met cared enough to write, to share their own stories, to give what little they could. We've raised $22,000, Beatrice said after the last letter was read. That's remarkable. It's not enough, Quinn finished, but her voice lacked its usual edge. Even she seemed touched by the letters, by the proof that they mattered to people beyond themselves. The next morning, Floyd arrived with news. There's going to be a town hall meeting tomorrow night. Community wants to help. They're organizing fundraisers, bake sales, silent auctions, benefit dinner at the diner. It's not much, but it's everything, Faye said, her voice thick with emotion. The town hall was packed, more than 60 people in a space meant for 40. Clay was stunned. He'd thought of Copper Ridge as a place he'd come to hide, not a place that would care about his problems. But here were neighbors he'd barely spoken to, merchants he'd bought supplies from, people who'd noticed him and the women and decided their fight mattered. Floyd stood at the front. We all know why we're here. Clay and he paused, searching for the right word. His family need our help. The county's coming for that property in 12 days. We can't let that happen. The ideas came fast. The hardware store would donate materials for a community workday to improve the property's value. The diner would host a fundraiser dinner, all proceeds going to the cause. The church would organize a silent auction. Local artists would contribute work. Even the small grocery store pledged a portion of weekend sales. It was beautiful. It was also insufficient. When all the pledges were tallied, they'd maybe raise another $4,000. Still leaving them $11,000 short with less than 2 weeks to go. But Clay stood before these people, these neighbors who owed him nothing, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not hope that they'd win necessarily, but hope that trying mattered. That community mattered. That showing up for each other, even in impossible circumstances, was worth doing. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. All of you. Whatever happens, thank you. A woman Clay didn't recognize stood up. My name's Beverly. I work at the county social services office. I shouldn't be here, but she looked around nervously. There are other options. Legal challenges. The process the county used might have been improper. There are deadlines they may have missed. Notifications that might not have been properly delivered. Can you help us? Beatrice asked. I can point you toward a lawyer who might take the case pro bono. But even if you win, it'll take months. You'd need an emergency injunction to stop the auction, and those are hard to get. But possible, Delilah pressed. Possible, but not probable. It was something. A thread of possibility in what had seemed like certain defeat. Clay met with the lawyer 2 days later, a woman named Angela Chen from a regional firm. She reviewed the paperwork and nodded slowly. There are irregularities. The county should have done more to locate you before the sale. The real estate agent definitely committed fraud by not disclosing the lien. You have grounds for a lawsuit against the agent. Will that stop the auction? No, but I can file for an emergency injunction. Might buy you time. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. But that doesn't solve the money problem. Even with more time, can you raise the remaining funds? Clay thought about the letters, the town hall, the donations that had slowed to a trickle. I don't know. But more time gives us a chance. Angela agreed to take the case pro bono. She filed the injunction that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for the day before the auction, cutting it impossibly close, but it was their only option. The community fundraisers began. The benefit dinner at the diner raised $800. The silent auction brought in $1,200 more. The church bake sale added $500. Every dollar mattered, but the goal still loomed impossibly distant. With 1 week remaining, they'd reached $28,000. Still $19,000 short. The women threw themselves into final efforts. Nessa's artwork was featured in the local gallery, and several pieces sold. Faye organized a yard sale of donated items. Quinn offered mechanical services to anyone who needed them, putting every cent toward the fund. Delilah reached out to veteran networks, telling their story to anyone who would listen. Clay worked on the property from dawn to dusk, driven by a desperate need to do something, anything. He improved the barn, strengthened structures, made the land as valuable as possible in case a miracle happened and they could keep it. Iris asked him one afternoon, while they were supposed to be doing her reading lesson, "Mr. Clay, are we going to have to leave?" Clay looked at this child who'd become so much a part of his life in such a short time. He couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, sweetheart. We're trying very hard to stay. Will you come with us?" "If we have to go." The question pierced him. "I'll always be there for you," he promised, though he had no idea how to keep that promise if they were scattered across different cities, different shelters, different lives. Iris hugged him then, fierce and sudden. "I love you, Mr. Clay." Clay held this small person who'd taught him that his heart could still break and still heal. "I love you too." 3 days before the auction, the crowdfunding campaign got unexpected attention. A popular podcast featured their story. Donations surged again. $5,000 in a single day, then $3,000 the next. By the morning of the injunction hearing, they'd reached $38,000. So close, still $9,000 short. Clay sat in the courtroom with Angela, watching the judge review their case. The county attorney argued that the process had been followed correctly, that the debt was legitimate, that the auction should proceed. Angela countered with evidence of procedural failures, inadequate notification, the real estate fraud. She was passionate, articulate, convincing. The judge listened, made notes, asked questions. "Finally, I'm granting a temporary injunction. The auction is stayed for 30 days while we investigate these claims more thoroughly. But Mr. Jensen, this is not a dismissal of the debt. You still owe the money. This just gives you time, 30 more days." It felt like a stay of execution, but it was something. Time to keep fighting. They left the courthouse with renewed energy. 30 days meant the crowdfunding could continue, meant more fundraisers, meant more chances. But that night, reality set in. They'd been at this for nearly a month. The viral attention had faded. The local community had given what it could. The letters had slowed to a trickle. Where would $9,000 more come from? "We're not giving up," Beatrice said, gathering everyone in the barn. "We have 30 days. We keep fighting until the last minute." But Clay could see the exhaustion in their faces, the weight of sustained hope against impossible odds. They'd all been running on determination and desperation for so long. How much longer could they sustain it? That week crawled by. Another $2,000 trickled in. But at this rate, they'd never make it. The math was brutal and unforgiving. Clay found himself bargaining with God, with the universe, with Linda's memory. "Just this one thing," he prayed into the desert night. "Let them keep their home. Let me keep them, please." The desert offered no response, just stars and silence, and the weight of approaching failure. The final Monday arrived with cruel sunshine and birdsong, mocking the desperation that had settled over the property. They'd raised $40,000, a number that would have seemed miraculous a month ago, now a symbol of how close they'd come to impossible. $7,000 short. 4 days remaining until the extended deadline. Kaew woke early, made coffee out of habit rather than desire, and sat on the farmhouse porch watching the barn. The women were already stirring. He could hear their voices, subdued and tired. They'd all been living on the razor's edge of hope and despair for too long. Beatrice emerged and walked toward him, 2 cups in her hands. She didn't say anything, just sat beside him and handed over the coffee. "I've been thinking," Kaew said after a long silence. "I could sell my truck. It's worth maybe $5,000, and I have some savings I've been holding back. Emergency money, retirement cushion. Another $3,000, maybe $4 if I liquidate everything." "Kaew, no. That's your security. You can't. What good is security if I lose you all?" He looked at her directly. "I'd rather be broke with a family than comfortable and alone." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. But it's not enough anyway. We'd still be short." She was right. Even selling everything, they'd fall $1,000 or $2 short. So close, so impossibly close. The morning mail came early. Floyd drove it out personally, his face unreadable. He handed Kaew a single certified envelope. "This came to the hardware store," Floyd said. "Addressed to you, care of my business." Sender didn't leave a return address. Kaew opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000 and a note card with a single line in unfamiliar handwriting, "Linda would be proud." Kaew stared at the check, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. 25,000, more than they needed. The exact amount to push them over the finish line. "Is it real?" Beatrice whispered, reading over his shoulder. Kaew's hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the paper. Who would... Floyd cleared his throat. "I may have made some calls. After Linda passed, I reached out to folks who knew her. People she helped over the years at that shelter. Let them know what you were doing out here, even if you didn't realize you were doing it." "Floyd, what did you do?" The old man's eyes were bright. "Linda helped a lot of women over the years. Changed lives. Some of those women are doing well now, really well. When I told them you'd taken in 5 homeless women, that you were fighting to keep them safe, well, they wanted to help. They organized privately, pooled resources, didn't want recognition, just wanted to honor Linda's memory by helping you continue her work." Kaew couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. He looked at the check, this impossible salvation, and understood that Linda's love was still protecting him, still guiding him, still making miracles happen from beyond death. Beatrice was crying openly now. "It's enough. Kaew, it's enough." The women had gathered, drawn by the commotion. When Kaew showed them the check, when Beatrice explained what it meant, the reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Faye collapsed to her knees, pulling Iris into a tight embrace. Quinn actually laughed, a sound of pure, disbelieving joy. Nessa covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Delilah stood at attention, tears streaming down her face in defiance of her military composure. "We're saved," Faye whispered into her daughter's hair. "Baby, we're saved. We get to stay." Iris didn't fully understand the adult's emotion, but she felt the joy and started crying too, happy tears mixing with confusion. Kaew stood there holding the check, this tangible proof of love that transcended death. Linda had spent years planting seeds of kindness, and now those seeds had grown into a forest that was sheltering him when he needed it most. Floyd wiped his own eyes. "Those women wanted you to know Linda gave them dignity when they had nothing. Saw them as people, not problems. You're doing the same thing, whether you meant to or not. They wanted to return the favor." "I don't deserve this," Kaew managed. "Maybe not," Floyd said with a gentle smile. "But you need it. And sometimes that's enough." They drove to the county office that afternoon. All of them, even Iris, piled into Kaew's truck and Faye's now repaired car. They walked into the clerk's office together, a family, and presented the check. Patricia Vance, the same clerk who delivered the terrible news weeks ago, processed the payment with visible relief on her face. "Paid in full," she said, stamping the documents. The property's yours, Mr. Jensen. Clear title. Ours, Clay corrected. The property's ours. When they returned to the property, the celebration was muted at first. They were all too exhausted, too emotionally wrung out for wild joy. But as the reality settled in, as they truly understood they weren't losing their home, the mood lightened. Quinn made a joke. Nessa laughed. Delilah smiled, really smiled. Beatrice started making dinner plans. Faye and Iris danced in circles, making up silly songs about staying forever. Clay stood apart, watching them, feeling Linda's ring warm against his chest. He pulled out her letter and read it again. The people who need you might not look like what you expect. Let them in anyway. She'd known. Somehow, impossibly, she'd known exactly what would happen. And she'd prepared the way, building a network of love and gratitude that would catch him when he fell. "Thank you," he whispered to the sky, to Linda, to the universe that had been kinder than he deserved. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The desert wind carried his words away, and somewhere in that vast space, Clay felt his wife's love like a benediction. The morning after they paid the taxes, Clay woke to the sound of voices outside. Not distressed voices, excited ones. He dressed quickly and stepped out to find all 5 women gathered near the barn and Floyd's truck parked nearby with Angela Chen, the lawyer, standing beside it. "What's going on?" Clay asked, walking toward them. Angela smiled. "I have news and a proposal." She spread documents across the hood of Floyd's truck. "The lawsuit against the real estate agent is proceeding. They committed clear fraud by not disclosing the tax lien. We'll likely win, and you'll recover damages, probably the full amount you paid in back taxes, maybe more." "That's wonderful," Beatrice said. "But why are you here?" Angela pulled out another document. "Because I want to suggest something. Clay, this property is yours legally, but from what I understand, it's become home to all 6 of you. I'd like to propose making that official." Clay looked at the papers. "What do you mean?" "A deed modification. Adding all 5 women as co-owners of the property. Equal shares. It would make this place legally belong to all of you, not just you." The words hung in the air, transforming from sound into possibility, into something that felt inevitable and right. "You do that?" Faye asked, looking at Clay. "Give up sole ownership?" Clay didn't hesitate. "This stopped being just mine the day you arrived. It's been ours all along. We should make it official." Quinn, always the skeptic, narrowed her eyes. "Why? What's in it for you?" "Family," Clay said simply. "Security for all of us, not just me. If something happens to me, you're not at risk of losing your home. This way, we're all protected." Nessa wiped her eyes. Clay, that's incredibly generous. It's not generosity. It's recognition of what already is." He looked at each woman in turn. "You've put your labor into this place, your hope, your hearts. You deserve to own it as much as I do." Delilah's military bearing softened. "I've never owned anything in my life." "Not really." "This is a commitment," Beatrice finished. "To each other. To this place. To being family, not just in feeling, but in law." Angela laid out the process. Each woman would need to sign. The deed would be recorded with the county. They'd all be equally responsible for property taxes, maintenance, decisions. It was a partnership in the truest sense. "What if we disagree about something?" Quinn asked, ever practical. "Then you work it out like families do," Angela said. "Talk, compromise, make decisions together." One by one they signed. Beatrice first, her signature steady and sure. Faye next, her hand trembling slightly with emotion. Delilah with military precision. Nessa with artistic flourish. Quinn last, trying to look casual, but failing to hide the significance of the moment. Clay signed last, watching his sole ownership transform into shared belonging. "It's done," Angela said, gathering the documents. "I'll file these this afternoon. By next week, you'll officially be co-owners." After Angela left, the 6 of them stood looking at the property, the barn with its mural, the improving farmhouse, the mended fences, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions. "We should celebrate," Faye said. "Really celebrate. Invite the community, and thank everyone who helped us." The celebration happened the following Saturday. Floyd came with supplies donated by the hardware store. The diner catered. The church brought desserts. Neighbors Clay had barely spoken to arrived with congratulations and warm wishes. More than 70 people gathered on the property, turning it into something Clay had never imagined, a place of joy, community, belonging. The mayor of Copper Ridge gave an informal speech. This town was built by people helping people. What Clay and these women have created here, that's the spirit we've always tried to maintain. We're proud to have you as neighbors. Iris performed a reading she'd been practicing with Clay, stumbling over a few words, but powering through with determination. The crowd applauded and the little girl beamed. Gwyn demonstrated her mechanical skills by getting an ancient tractor running, something that had sat broken for decades. The engine roared to life, and the cheers were genuine. Nessa's artwork was displayed throughout the barn, and several people commissioned pieces. She was starting a real business, building a real future. Delilah spoke briefly about her military service and her journey to this place. I thought I'd lost my purpose when I left the army, but purpose isn't something you have. It's something you build with the people around you. Beatrice announced that her son Philip would be visiting in 2 weeks, bringing his family. After 5 years of silence, I'm getting my son back. This place, you all, gave me the courage to reach out, to ask for what I needed, instead of suffering in pride. Faye simply held Iris close and said, "We're home. Really, truly home. For the first time in years, we're not afraid of tomorrow." When it was Clay's turn to speak, he stood before the crowd with Linda's ring hanging against his heart and found himself struggling for words. 6 months ago, I came here to hide from life. I'd lost my wife, lost my way, lost any sense of purpose. I wanted isolation. He looked at the 5 women, his family. What I got instead was exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know I needed it. These women saved my life as much as I helped theirs. We saved each other. He paused, collecting himself. My wife Linda knew that love doesn't die. It transforms. It finds new channels, new expressions, new ways to heal and strengthen and guide. This family we've built, this is Linda's love, still working in the world, still making miracles happen. Floyd started the applause, and soon everyone joined in. The sound echoed across the desert, celebration and validation and recognition that what they'd built together mattered. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, the 6 of them stood together by Nessa's mural, the painted figures that had predicted their family before it fully existed. "To family," Beatrice said, raising a glass. "To home," Faye added. "To second chances," Delilah contributed. "To not giving up," Quinn said, her voice soft. "To beautiful things," Nessa whispered. "And to tomorrow," Iris said, not fully understanding but feeling the importance. "To love," Clay finished, "in all its forms, especially the ones we don't expect." They clinked glasses as stars began emerging in the darkening sky, and the desert wind carried their laughter across land that now belonged to all of them equally. Family, home, future, finally, all 3 at once. 3 months later, autumn arrived in the high desert with cooler mornings and a quality of light that turned everything golden. Clay woke to the smell of coffee, not his own, but Beatrice's, made in the new thermos she'd given him as a gift. A replacement for the old one, she'd said, but really a symbol of new traditions built on the foundation of remembered love. He walked out to find the property transformed beyond recognition. The barn stood solid and proud, its interior now divided into comfortable living spaces for each woman while maintaining a common area where they gathered for meals. The farmhouse had been fully restored, and Clay lived there with a guest room always ready for his daughter Michelle's visits. The fences were all mended. The gardens Beatrice had planted were thriving, producing vegetables they sold at the farmer's market every weekend. Solar panels donated by a local business powered the property. Chickens roamed a newly built coop, Iris's special responsibility. Breakfast was, as always, a communal affair. The 6 of them gathered around the large table Clay had built. Their morning ritual, their daily confirmation that this was real and lasting. Iris chatted about school, about her friends, about the book report she was working on. The frightened, silent child who'd arrived 3 months ago was gone, replaced by a confident second grader who loved learning and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. "Mr. Clay, can we practice my presentation after breakfast?" she asked. "Of course," Clay said, still teaching in the ways that mattered most, one child at a time with patience and care. Quinn appeared from under the hood of a neighbor's car she was repairing for extra money. She'd been accepted to the community college's automotive program and would start classes in January. Floyd had offered her a permanent position at the hardware store, working around her school schedule. "I got that transmission figured out," she announced, pouring herself coffee. "Should be done by noon." The defensive, angry teenager who'd arrived 3 months ago had softened without losing her edge. She still challenged, still questioned, but now from a place of security rather than fear. Delilah had found work at the county VA office, helping other veterans navigate the bureaucracy of benefits and services. She was good at it, patient, knowledgeable, able to translate military experience into civilian success. The nightmares had decreased. She slept through most nights now, the demons of war gradually losing their hold. Nessa's art business had taken off. Her paintings of the desert, of their family, of transformation and hope sold steadily. A gallery in a larger city had offered her a solo show in the spring. She was building a career from her talent, no longer having to choose between survival and art. Faye worked at the Agricultural Extension Office, teaching sustainable farming practices. Her ranch knowledge, combined with her natural teaching ability, made her perfect for the role. She and Clay had expanded the property's gardens, creating a demonstration site for drought-resistant crops. Iris thrived with the stability, excelling in school and making friends. Beatrice had part-time nursing work at the county clinic, but her real passion had become coordinating with Linda's old network of women. Together, they'd created a formal organization providing support, resources, and emergency housing for women in transition. The property had become an unofficial model, proof that alternative housing solutions could work when community came together. "Philip's arriving this afternoon," Beatrice announced, checking her phone. "He's bringing Sarah and the kids. They'll stay through the weekend." After 5 years of estrangement, Beatrice had her son back in her life. Their reconciliation had been gradual, careful, but genuine. Clay had watched her transform as that relationship healed, the guilt and regret replaced by gratitude and hope. That afternoon, Clay stood on the porch watching a car approach. His daughter, Michelle, emerged with her husband and their 2 young children. Monthly visits had become routine, bridges rebuilt through patience and time. "Dad!" Michelle hugged him tight. "The place looks amazing. You've done so much since last month." "We've done it together," Clay corrected, gesturing at the women who'd become family. "That's how everything works here, together." The property filled with children's laughter, adult conversation, the comfortable chaos of family. Philip arrived with his family, and the 2 sets of grandchildren quickly became friends, racing around the property under the watchful eyes of the adults. Clay found himself standing by Nessa's mural, now protected by a clear sealant to preserve it for years to come. The 6 painted figures looked out over a desert sunrise, united and strong. Beneath them, those words, "Family isn't what you're born to. It's what you build." Beatrice joined him, following his gaze. She captured something true there. "Before we even knew it was true, Linda would have loved this," Clay said quietly. "All of it. The noise, the chaos, the life. She's here," Beatrice said with certainty. "In every choice you made, every door you opened, every time you said yes when you wanted to say no. Her love didn't end, it multiplied." Evening brought everyone together for dinner, a massive meal prepared by multiple hands, served at tables pushed together to accommodate the crowd. Clay looked around at the faces, his daughter, his grandchildren, Beatrice's son and family, the 5 women who'd become his chosen family, and Iris, this child who called him Grandpa Clay now, and meant it. They ate and talked and laughed as the desert cooled and stars began emerging. Someone asked Clay to play the harmonica, and he obliged, the simple folk melody filling the air with sweetness. When the music ended, Iris climbed into his lap. "Tell us the story again," she said, "about how we all found each other." Clay looked at the faces gathered around, at family built from loss and luck and choice. Once upon a time, he began, a man bought some land hoping to find peace. What he found instead was exactly what he needed. Family, Iris supplied, knowing the story by heart. That's right, Clay said, holding her close. Family. The very best kind, the kind you choose and build and fight to keep. The stars wheeled overhead, infinite and indifferent and beautiful. The desert wind whispered through the sage. And in a barn in the middle of nowhere, 6 people who'd been strangers had become something more. Proof that love persists, that community matters, that second chances are real if you're brave enough to accept them. Clay touched Linda's ring through his shirt, feeling its familiar weight against his heart. She'd been right about everything. The people who needed him hadn't looked like what he expected. But he'd let them in anyway, and in doing so, he'd found his way back to life. The property that was supposed to be his escape had become his home. The isolation he'd sought had transformed into belonging. The end he'd been preparing for had become a beginning. Sometimes the life you need finds you in the most unexpected places. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into, it's what you choose to build. And sometimes, when you think you're saving someone else, you discover they were saving you all along. Clay looked at the faces around him. His family, chosen and earned and fought for, and understood that grief and joy could coexist. That loss and love were 2 sides of the same coin. That endings were also beginnings, if you had the courage to see them that way. Again, Iris demanded when he finished the story. Clay smiled, surrounded by love in all its unexpected forms, and began again. Once upon a time, the desert listened. The stars watched, and in a barn transformed by hope and work and determination, 6 strangers who'd become family lived the happily ever after they'd built together, one day at a time.